the first thing I ask is what term do you use to describe the force, the spirit? How would you refer to the source of everything?
Well, I'd use the word God. I believe in God.
And how would you define that force? How would you? I know it's a tough question to ask and to answer, but how would you describe and define the force of God?
Definitions are really difficult because we reach the edge of language when we speak of the divine. And so we can speak in images and metaphors. One of our great thinkers, Thomas Merton, described God as a circle whose center is everywhere. I would think of God as the presence in the universe that's closer to me than anything, transcendent above everything, and as the source of personal relationship in everything. So these are all different metaphors and images that I think take us beyond the edge of language.
And is there a specific part of your body that you feel this force?
No. I feel more surrounded by God like the air. In fact, in the Hebrew scriptures, which are very important to Christians, there's this notion of life as the breathing out of God, and death as the breathing in of God. So the Hebrew word that's used is nephesh. So you have this idea of the breath of God bringing life, and I think it's a useful image because, of course, air is one of the elements without which we cannot live, and to the notion of being surrounded and filled by God as we are by the air is, for me, a powerful image. And so it means that God is close, more close than anything, but not the same as me. I don't confuse God and nature as one and the same thing. There's a distinction, but God is the center of all love, the powerful force that draws all things together and gives everything its differentiation.
So how would you describe the difference between nature? I'm assuming you include man in nature?
Yeah.
So where would you say the line is between those two?
Well, I believe in a creator and the creation, and they're not the same thing. So that I exist because God exists before me, and so God has created me and you and everything that exists. There are some spiritualities that see nature itself as divine. I see nature as sacred, but not divine. Sacred because it's created by God, and that it expresses the fullness of God's love for us, because I believe God created everything out of love, not out of need. And that this love infuses everything, but I don't worship nature. I don't worship the earth. I don't worship the forces of the universe, but that which created them and holds them in being.
So the word worship is one of those touchstone words, I think, for a lot of people. What would you describe the action of worship? What is worship? What is the action of worship? What is taking place?
I think we have built into us as human beings a spiritual nature, and this acts like a homing instinct in us. One of our great teachers in ancient times, St. Augustine, said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." That's it's actually a prayer, but what it says is that there's a kind of built-in spiritual radar beacon, if you like, in all human beings that is trying to find our way home to God. And that part of this seeking and journeying home involves restlessness. So restlessness, spiritual restlessness, is a normal and natural condition in us. But once we kind of, if you like, lock on to the radar beam, the home beacon, and find our way, then it evokes in us joy, adoration, deep pleasure, deep desire to orient our lives to come into right relationship with God, the source of all life and goodness. And so it naturally expresses itself in worship. There are many forms of worship. Of course, Christians have many forms of worship. People of other religious and spiritual traditions have their own forms of worship, but worship is common to all humans. And I think we're living in a time when many people have turned away from religious and spiritual paths, and I think it creates a kind of void, a sort of emptiness, in which people feel something is missing, and the something is that connectedness with the heart of everything.
How would you describe the force of love? What love is?
Love is much more than a feeling. It's not a sentiment, and it's much more than even a pleasant feeling. I mean, I think there are aspects of love that cause great pain, great sacrifice. The Christian faith expresses this, of course, through the crucifixion, the whole image of Christ dying on the cross. But I think in ordinary human experience, we know that to love someone is often involves our own sacrifice. So it's not just fuzzy feeling. It's not just warm feelings of goodness about life itself. I think love is a deep call to us to become authentically ourselves, to find our deep humanity, to be in right relationship with that which is the creator of all. And it can be a hard and difficult path. Much of our attempts to find love in human life, in relationships, is clumsy, it's awkward, often we stumble and fall. And what I see in God, as I understand that through Jesus Christ, is a kind of unconditional welcome that constantly flows towards us, making no conditions upon us. But the sheer goodness and beauty of that calls us to orient our lives towards perfection and purity, and to be transformed in the love that we seek.
So how does the force of love relate to the force of God?
Oh, I think they're the same thing. In our Bible it says God is love. God's nature is love. If we know love, then we know God. It may not be the name that we place upon our experience. I mean, everybody, of course, hopefully in their lives will experience love. Not all of them would call that God. But I think it all flows, as I say, from the same center, the same source. God's love is so far beyond our love, however. One of the realities of the human condition is that we are finite, we're limited, we are boundaried. We're boundaried by birth and death, by time, by the circumstances of our particular births. And so there's a limit to everything that we know, and there's a limit to human love. There are conditions that can arise in which it's impossible for us to continue loving. But God is not bounded by those same temporal conditions, and so there's a limitlessness to God, which makes God's love something infinitely greater than we experience as human beings.
And I guess there's also a theory that since if we are God's love, then we are also infinite. Is that do you subscribe to that? Or?
Yeah, there's an idea of the imago Dei in Christianity, the image of God. Each of us carries within us the image of God. It's again been variously expressed. Sometimes it's described as a divine spark, sometimes as free will. There have been various ways of understanding the image of God in human beings. But I think it represents that limitless dimension, that supernatural truth, if you like, that links us to our Creator and makes us part of a far greater reality than simply our own lives, our own existence. But we are not superhuman, we are human. We're not transcendent, we're immanent, we're not gods. But there is within us a capacity to become like God, and that's the task of human life.
How would you describe the force of death? What's the pressure of death on life? What is the purpose of death?
Yeah. Well, we're, as I say, limited human beings, so we know that death is a constant reality. The death rate, as far as I know, is still 100%. It hasn't gone up, nor down. And so it marks that boundary of life towards which we're always marching. There's an old Christian hymn that speaks about singing Alleluia on our way to the grave. And I think it's a nice image in the sense that we know where we're going. We know that we will not survive this earthly life in our present form. And so instead of being oppressed by that fact, instead of being worried about it or seeking some sort of cult of eternal youth, eternal beauty or wealth or all of that stuff, the spiritual task is to find joy in our very finiteness, our very limitedness, knowing that it's not all that can be said of human existence. There is more because there is God. So I like this image, this Hebrew image of death as God breathing in. When I take a funeral, for example, I will often say over the grave, we therefore commit this body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And it's this biblical idea of when God breathes in and the nephesh, the breath of life, is withdrawn from us, we simply crumble to dust from which we first came. So we're always part of the breathing in and the breathing out of God. Even in death, we're breathed back into the life of God. And in that sense, we participate in God's immortality.
So the experiences and whatever we acquire in our lifetimes that we relinquish at death, do you have any idea of, or what happens with all that?
Well, nobody knows what happens after death. And the speculations are mostly useless. I think what we can say, however, is that human life is not meaningless, and we, as Christians, I as a Christian believe that life does not end with death. But in what form it moves on, I don't care to speculate.
It wasn't really concerned with the form as much as if there is a grand design, which I'm sure we all believe there is to some, whether we can understand or not, I'm sure we have no question we can't. But the purpose, which is kind of my next question too, the purpose for human beings to have this experience, and then the pressure that death puts on us, the limitations. Do you have any theory on, or is there a theory within religion that has an explanation for that?
Sometimes it's helpful to ask what other kind of universe God could have created. I mean, to speculate for a moment to this extent. What would it be like if there were no death? What would it be like if there were no suffering? What would it be like if you could drive a car down the highway at 160 miles an hour and it didn't matter whether there were other people on the road because no harm would ever come? What kind of humanity would emerge if there was no cancer, no tragic deaths of children, horrible as that is? See, it seems to me that the very limitedness and the uncertainty of death, the uncertainty amidst the certainty of it, creates our humanity in a particular way. We become compassionate. We become responsible. I can't drive my car down the highway at 150 k's, regardless of who else is on it, because it will cause real harm. Death is real. And if I were to take away someone else's life, that is not a casual thing. It's a tragic thing. So death, in a sense, acts as that tragedy that humanizes us, that makes us care, that makes us ethical people. And if we lived in a world with no consequences for any action, somebody fires a bullet and an invisible hand comes down and deflects the bullet, then would we care for each other? Would we have any sense of morality towards one another? Would we worry about our children, and what would be the point of living? So I think, in the sense that it's possible to imagine another kind of world where there would be no death, we would also have to imagine no humanity, or a very, very different kind of existence than the one we know.
Which leads me to my next question, which is purpose or intention. I guess you mentioned earlier about the concept of free will, whether it's a true, whether we do or not. How would you describe purpose for an individual? I don't know if is that clear enough for you, what I'm getting at? In a way, because what you're saying is that death puts the pressure on us that we have a limited amount of time. We have an end at the beginning, and therefore everything we have to do in this time period. So you have to decide what's important. In a way, death is what sheds the nonsense if you're really focused on it. So then it comes into free will or purpose of the individual. What's your purpose, knowing that it's all going to end? So what I'm trying to get at is, how would you describe the purpose of the individual?
Well, all life is a search for purpose. And as we know, people find different purposes for their lives. Some become self-absorbed. Some look out only for themselves or their own interests. Some seem to think that acquisition of material goods or wealth or power or beauty or something like that is going to provide them with a sufficiently purposeful life that it will lead to happiness and satisfaction. What the great religions, including my own, I think know is that we have to find our purpose beyond ourselves, outside ourselves, and never simply within. I think it was Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, who talked about the movement from the aesthetic to the moral to the religious, a kind of developmental sense of purpose, so that we often begin as children with an aesthetic sense of purpose, that is to say, what pleases me is good, my toys, my food, my mother's milk. But as we progress in life, we then have to look outside ourselves to the other. And this represents a stage of development, moral development and spiritual development in a purposeful life. But there's a stage beyond even the other, and that's what I'm talking about in terms of a relationship with God. So not everyone goes all the way down that developmental path. Some people stop at various points along the way. But we all have to find a purpose, otherwise people commit suicide. Those who have lost their purpose or cannot find it or believe in one see no reason to continue living, and that's a great tragedy.
Can you relate the concept of free will within the concept of God granting us that possibility?
Well, free will comes from God in the sense that it's built into us. But free will is not an unlimited freedom of will. I am not free, for example, to stop breathing for an hour or two. I'm not free to leap off a 500-foot cliff. My freedom is within the limits set by the creation itself and God's design. So Nevertheless, it's a real freedom. God has made me so free that I can choose to deny God. I can choose to reject God's love. God is not going to impose God's self on me, but offers himself to me so that I am free to accept or reject the gift of his life and his death. In the same way, I have to educate my choices, the use of my will, in a way that enables me to find that higher purpose beyond myself, beyond my own interests, that leads to happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction, a sense of a completed life. Much of that will depend upon how I exercise my free will. If I consistently make wrong choices, bad choices, then the choices that become available to me as I go through my life shrink. And I no longer, at a certain point, I'm no longer able to choose the things that I consistently rejected earlier on. And so we make our own bed and lie in it in a real sense. And that, I think, is true whatever the circumstances of our birth. Some people are born into an extraordinary privilege, some not. But free will is a matter of choosing to believe, choosing to see the way home, whatever our circumstances.
So how do you know? Is there? I'm always trying to relate the body to our. Like actually, as you started the conversation, I think our bodies are totally related to our actions and our perception.
Yeah.
So I always like to ask: is there a specific part of your body that you feel decision making in? In other words, when you have a sense that you're on the right road, or on the right path, or the right decision, is there a feeling or a point of your body where you feel that? Like, how do you know? Is it intellectual? I'm sure it's not just intellectual, right?
I, in my own spiritual journey, have not located centers of particular insight in my body. I haven't. I think bodies can mislead us as well as guide us in the right direction. I mean, we learn to listen to our bodies. Our health, physical health and spiritual, emotional health are interconnected. But I haven't, in the way that some medieval spiritual traditions did, for example, located the center of understanding with the heart or other organs in the body. I just don't think that way. I do know that when we are on the right path, when we are making the right decisions, there is a sense of well-being that is not only spiritual and emotional but also physical. And that again can be a sense of well-being despite physical disabilities. There's a story of Jesus in the Bible healing 10 lepers, and he physically heals them, and they all go away, but only one comes back to thank him. And the one who comes back to thank him, Jesus says, "Your faith has made you whole." Now, so there's a difference being physically well and being whole, and you can be whole when you're not physically well. And I've seen this, of course, in many people of deep spirituality whose bodies are failing them, but whom you would have to say are whole persons because they radiate that sense of transcendent love, and they know who they are and where they're going.
Cool, great. So one last question. It's kind of a a what if thing, but I like to ask this of everybody too. Is in a perfect world, in your perfect world, what would the world be like in your perfect world?
It would be a world of justice. It would be a world where the gifts that God has showered upon us, material, intellectual, emotional, spiritual gifts, are used and shared to the benefit of each other. It would be a world where we lived in harmony with the creation, with nature, with each other. It would be a world where we helped each other along life's journey from innocence to wisdom. It will not happen in my lifetime or yours, but it's a goal towards which I think we need to make all our political decisions, all our economic decisions, all our scientific decisions. All human knowledge and willpower should be bent towards the goal of harmony, in which no one is exploited, abused, rejected, killed, but each has the chance for what Jesus talked about is the fullness of life. He said, "I've come that you may have fullness of life." Fullness of life is a rich spiritual concept. It has to do with our relationships with one another. It has to do with our contentment within ourselves and our deep knowledge of God and how that shapes everything that we are and all the decisions we make.
Cool. That's what I'm hoping this does. My little bit of
Good.
in that direction. So one last question is how do you relate to the leaders of other religions? I mean, it's such a discordant world in beliefs, right? I mean, like I said, that's one thing I want to do is I want to interview varied religions, shamans, scientists, and get their views on these very same things. And I'm just curious how you relate. I'm sure you talk to people all the time from different walks of life.
Yeah.
Where do you see the discordance between everybody?
Well, I believe something a Muslim poet wrote 8 centuries ago. Rumi said, "We are all different lamps, but the light is the same." So I believe that all light comes from God. But it's refracted in different ways, through different lenses, cultures, languages, people, traditions. And what the task of religions is today is to build bridges of understanding, not battlements of competition. So we've had a long history of competition among religions, even hostility, which has done so much to destroy not only the world but people's hope. And we have an opportunity now, I think, to see the light in one another, and instead of needing to impose our language for that light on one another, to simply accept it as the sheer gift of God in each other, and begin to harness our spiritual power, because I do believe that there's great power in religious and spiritual traditions which, if it were harnessed together, could utterly transform the world. We know that politicians and economists and corporate business and the education system are not going to bring about the transformation of the world that is so needed. And we also know that religious and spiritual traditions have often introduced violence into situations when it was, the opposite was required. So we've got to be, I think, working together in mutual respect and responsibility. And I get along very well with religious leaders of other faiths who share that view. I don't get along quite so well with people who want to impose their own particular religious view on the rest of the world.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great.
Okay.